The envelope arrived on April 15th, the one day of the year Margaret never ignored her mail. It was thin, cream-colored, and addressed in a precise, almost surgical script. No return address, no stamp, as though it had slipped through the cracks of the world just to find her. Margaret stood in the foyer of her townhome, heels still on, keys still in hand, staring at it longer than she cared to admit. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across her marble floors. Inside, everything was immaculate, calculated, controlled, certain. Certainty, that was the thing she trusted most.
In this world,
Her father used to say, adjusting his tie before leaving for work.
nothing can be said to be certain except death and taxes.
Margaret had built her life mastering one of them. She slit the envelope open with her nail and pulled out a single sheet of paper. No signature, no greeting, just a sentence. "You forgot something." Margaret frowned. She didn't forget things. Not deadlines, not numbers, not people. Especially not people. Her entire career, her empire, really, was built on that precision. She was a forensic accountant, the kind that wealthy clients hired when something didn't add up, and they needed someone ruthless enough to find out why, and she always did. Her phone buzzed in her hand, snapping her attention away. A message from William.
Dinner tonight? We should celebrate. Tax season survived.
Margaret smiled faintly. William had a way of making everything feel lighter, softer. He was an attorney, charming in a way that disarmed people before they even realized they'd been persuaded. They had met 3 years ago over a case, one of her clients, one of his negotiations, and somewhere between spreadsheets and settlement agreements, something real had formed. Or at least, that's what she believed.
7 p.m. Don't be late.
She replied. She folded the note carefully, sliding it back into the envelope, and placed it on the console table. She would deal with it later. After all, there were only 2 certainties in life, and neither of them had anything to do with cryptic letters. Dinner was perfect. The restaurant was dimly lit, intimate without being crowded. Margaret wore black. She always wore black when she wanted to feel invincible. And William looked at her like she was the only thing in the room worth seeing.
To another successful year.
He said, raising his glass.
To surviving it.
She corrected, clinking hers against his. They talked about everything and nothing. Clients, cases, plans for a vacation they kept postponing. William reached across the table, brushing his thumb against her wrist in that absent-minded way he had, as though touching her was second nature. Margaret felt something soften in her chest. Certainty, she thought, didn't always have to feel cold. When the check came, William insisted on paying.
My treat.
He said.
You've been buried in work for months.
Margaret didn't argue. She rarely did when it came to him. It was almost midnight when she returned home. The house was silent, pristine, unchanged. Except for the envelope, it was no longer on the console table. Margaret froze. A slow, deliberate unease crept up her spine as her eyes scanned the room. Nothing else was out of place. No sign of forced entry, no disturbance. Just the absence of something that had been there before. She stepped further inside, heels clicking softly against the floor.
Hello?
She called out, her voice steady, controlled. No answer. Margaret moved toward her office. If there was one place in the house that mattered, it was there. The door was slightly ajar. She knew she had closed it. A flicker of irritation cut through her unease. She pushed the door open. Her desk was untouched. Files stacked neatly. Laptop closed. And in the center of the desk, placed with deliberate precision, was the envelope. Margaret approached slowly. The paper was no longer flat. Something had been added. She opened it again. Inside, beneath the original message, was a second line. Check your accounts. Margaret's breath stilled. Now, that got her attention. By 12:17 a.m., she was logged into her system. Multiple screens lit the darkened office, casting sharp blue light across her face as her fingers moved quickly, expertly. She didn't panic. Panic was for people who didn't understand the numbers. Margaret understood everything. Or so she thought. At first, nothing seemed wrong. Balances aligned, transactions matched, no discrepancies. But Margaret didn't stop at seemed. She dug deeper, cross-referencing, recalculating, following trails invisible to anyone without her training. And then, there, a flicker, a fraction of a cent buried in a series of transactions. So small it would be dismissed as rounding error. But it wasn't random. Margaret leaned closer to the screen. Her heartbeat slowed, not quickened. Focus sharpened. She traced it. One account to another, then another, then another. A pattern emerged, tiny amounts, diverted, hidden, layered across dozens of accounts, individually insignificant. Together. Margaret ran the calculation. Her lips parted slightly. Not insignificant at all. It was millions. Someone had been siphoning money from her accounts. Her accounts. For how long? She scrolled back further. Months, no. Years. Margaret's mind raced, assembling possibilities, eliminating impossibilities. No external breach. Her security was airtight. No unauthorized access logs. Which meant the realization settled over her like a shadow. Someone with access, someone she trusted. Margaret sat back slowly. There were very few people on that list. Very few people she allowed close enough to touch her life, her work, her finances. Her phone buzzed again. William, had a great night. Sleep well. Margaret stared at the message. Her chest tightened, not with emotion, but with clarity, certainty. She turned back to her screens, pulled up access logs, permissions, shared credentials. There it was. A secondary authorization she had granted 18 months ago. Temporary, she remembered. Just to streamline a joint investment. She had never revoked it. Margaret closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. Cold, precise, certain. The next evening, she invited William over.
Dinner at my place.
She said lightly.
My turn.
He arrived with wine and that easy smile she had once found disarming. Now she saw it differently. Not warmth, strategy. They ate, they laughed. Margaret watched him carefully. Every gesture, every glance, looking for the fracture in the illusion. It wasn't obvious. William was good. Very good, but so was she. After dinner, she poured them both a drink.
Tell me something,
She said, leaning against the counter.
Do you believe in certainty?
William chuckled.
That's a heavy question for a Tuesday night.
Humor me.
He took a sip, considering.
I think people like to believe in it.
He said.
Gives them a sense of control.
And you?
I think control is an illusion.
Margaret smiled faintly.
That's interesting.
She said.
Because I've always believed the opposite.
William tilted his head.
Yeah?
I believe everything can be known, tracked, verified,
She paused.
accounted for.
Something flickered in his eyes. There it was. Small, but real. Margaret set her glass down.
I checked my accounts last night.
She said calmly. Silence. William didn't move, didn't speak. Margaret stepped closer.
There's a discrepancy,
She continued.
a very sophisticated one.
Still, he said nothing.
But here's the thing.
She added, her voice softening.
No system is perfect, not even one designed by someone like me.
William exhaled slowly. And then he smiled. Not the same smile. This one was sharper, colder.
Guess you finally found it.
He said. No denial, no deflection, just confirmation. Margaret felt something settle inside her. Not shock, not heartbreak, something else. understanding.
How long?
She asked.
2 years,
He replied easily.
give or take.
Margaret nodded.
That's impressive.
Thank you.
They stood there facing each other. Two people who had shared a life, now reduced to opposing sides of a calculation.
Why?
She asked. William shrugged.
Because I could. Because you didn't notice. Because you trust your systems more than you trust people.
Margaret considered that. He wasn't entirely wrong.
And the letter?
She asked. William frowned slightly.
What letter?
Margaret studied him carefully. There was no shift, no hesitation, just confusion. Real confusion, which meant he hadn't sent it. A new variable entered the equation. Margaret felt a ripple of something unfamiliar. Uncertainty.
Someone warned me.
She said quietly. William's expression darkened.
Then you should be thanking them.
He replied. Margaret's gaze hardened.
Oh, I intend to.
She walked past him, toward her office.
Where are you going?
He called after her.
To finish this.
The authorities arrived an hour later. William didn't resist. Why would he? The evidence was airtight. Margaret had ensured that. As they led him away, he looked back at her.
You'll never know who sent that letter.
He said. Margaret met his gaze.
Actually,
She said.
I think I will.
He smiled faintly.
Careful.
He replied.
Some things are better left unknown.
Margaret didn't respond. She simply closed the door. It was nearly dawn when she returned to her office. The house was quiet again, order restored. Or so it appeared. Margaret sat at her desk, the envelope in front of her. She had analyzed everything. Security footage, entry points, digital logs, no trace, no explanation. The letter had simply appeared and then moved. Impossible. Margaret didn't believe in impossible. She picked up the envelope one last time, turned it over in her hands. And then she saw it, faint, almost invisible, an impression in the paper. Not ink, pressure, as though something had been written before, then removed. Margaret angled it toward the light, slowly, carefully. Letters began to emerge. Her breath caught. It wasn't a warning, not exactly. It was a record, a list, dates, transactions, accounts, not just William's, hers. Margaret's mind raced. Number. That wasn't possible. She pulled up her system again, hands moving faster now, deeper, further than she had gone before. And then she found it, hidden beneath layers of her own design, a set of transactions she had no memory of creating, precise, strategic, brilliant, millions, moved, hidden, untouchable. Margaret stared at the screen. Her reflection stared back, unblinking, uncertain. And then a memory surfaced, fragmented, a late night, too much wine, a conversation she couldn't quite recall, a decision made in a moment she had dismissed or forgotten, deliberately. Margaret leaned back slowly, the truth unfolding in front of her. Not betrayal, not entirely. Something worse. Something far more dangerous. She had done this, not consciously, but intentionally enough to execute it flawlessly. A contingency, a safeguard. Against what? Against whom? Margaret looked at the envelope again. At the message. You forgot something. Her own handwriting, her own system, her own mind, protecting her from a future she had anticipated, but couldn't remember planning. Margaret let out a soft, hollow laugh.
In this world,
She whispered.
nothing can be said to be certain.
Her gaze shifted to the screen, to the numbers, to the truth.
Except death?
Her reflection stared back at her. Changed, different, unknown.
And taxes.
But now, Margaret understood something else, something far more unsettling. The most dangerous betrayal was the one you didn't remember committing, and the most terrifying uncertainty was yourself.